Hey everybody, this is John for MTG Nexus, doing another one of the Versus series. Today we're doing Boros Burn versus 4-Color Whirza. 4-Color Whirza is a deck that has been powerful and gaining strength ever since the printing of Urza, and also it's a deck that hasn't been too terribly affected by the bannings or unbannings. It was not reliant on Faithless Looting or Hogak, obviously, and really doesn't play Stoneforge Mystic in most of its variants. One big thing that has helped Whirza a little bit is, number one, not a lot of people pick up and play the deck yet, because it is still one of the more difficult style decks, much like the War Prison decks or the decks like Lantern before it. Does require you to have some knowledge of what to do. And it is, I've played it a little bit personally trying to get ready for this video set, and it does require basically a 3-card combo to get the infinite combo, which cannot be the easiest thing in the world. Especially when you really can't search for Urza itself. Beyond that, the deck is pretty powerful, pretty strong, but with that said, let's do some quick deck techs and get into the matches. As a friendly reminder, if you like what you're seeing on the channel, please consider subscribing, giving us a thumbs up, and leaving a constructive comment down below, as we aim to become the most informative lightning bolt-based channel in Modern on YouTube. So, burn list, nothing too special. The main callouts for this particular matchup, especially on the sideboard, are the 3 copies of Smash to Smithereens, pretty important against any type of artifact-based deck. Rest in Peace helps to make the infinite part of the combo more difficult to exploit. Which does give us some prayer with the Skullcracks and such, and then finally the 3rd and 4th copies of Skullcrack out of the sideboard. Beyond that, main deck, nothing too surprising. Grim Lavamancer usually ends up coming out of the matchup. Searing Blaze, obviously not very good other than the face of Goblin Engineer. And I've been trimming Rift Bolts because some of the older versions of Whirza had been doing copies of Teferi Time Raveler. They're up for obviously making Rift Bolt a much worse card. Still not sure that's correct right now. A lot of it depends on the builds. Continuing to focus on the 4-color builds or the 3-color Esper or the blue-white builds. This sideboard playing was more based on the fact of Rift Bolt and trying to avoid getting a card blanked by 3 Fairy completely. Beyond that, this is kind of your usual Boros Burn deck. Matchup plays out fairly interesting, but let's get into the deck tech of the particular Whirza deck we'll be battling against today. So we're back for the deck tech for the Whirza deck we were playing against. This is an example of the 4-color Whirza decks that are currently being played. They're still basically almost colorless with a splash, or almost mono blue with a splash of a bunch of the other colors. The main things that this version gains is cards out of the sideboard, but between cards like Mox Opal, Spire Industry, and Arkham's Astrolabe, it's relatively easy for this deck to cast anything with significant mana costs of multiple colors. So, like a single green spell, a single blue spell, or a single black spell don't terribly tax the mana a lot. Plus, you do have access to fetch lands and such, and some dual lands in addition to all the snow lands. Snow lands obviously important for casting Arkham's Astrolabe on effect. Beyond that, you've got fast mana with Mox Opal. Mishra's Bauble as another 0-mana artifact to help enable Bauble. And you have a bunch of random things. You have things like Pirate Spellbomb to kill creatures that could be problematic. Nihil Spellbomb in the main deck to help against artifact decks. Obviously, a card like Pithing Needle could be in the main and the side. This helps shut down problematic Planeswalkers, things like Jace the Mind Sculptor. Chromatic Star helps cycle through the deck. Mana restrictions, gets around mana restrictions, etc. Sword of the Meek is important to go with your Thopter Sword Founder combo, and then Urza on its own, a very powerful card, especially when you're turning all your artifacts into basically Moxes that produce blue, and then obviously the Golem itself, and then the ability to draw cards and play them off the top of your deck, or bottom of the deck, I guess, is quite important. Beyond that, one Sai here as kind of another tertiary threat besides the combos and Urza itself. One Snaring Bridge to help close out against creature decks, and then finally one thing like Dampening Sphere to kind of shut down the random big mana decks in the main deck, kind of a hate card in the main deck. Knicker Wellspring to help cycle through your deck. Goblin Engineer helps you find your card you're looking for, either your Foundry or your Sword of the Meek if you untap with it. Basically, it gives you a tutor for these combo pieces plus things like Ensnaring Bridge or just more fuel going to go get the various, like a Knicker Wellspring or an Arcum's Astrolabe or something. Kind of cycle through your deck, or potentially a long way of finding one of your hate cards. Play this one turn, activate it, put the hate card into play the next turn. And then beyond that, 2 copies of War of Invention, kind of tying it all together, allowing to find your combo pieces, your ensnaring bridges, etc., and whatever to keep you alive, and 1 Welding Jar, both as a 0-mana enabler and to protect your key piece, whatever you need, one of either the Thopter Foundry and the ensnaring bridge to kind of get rolling. Sideboard has a lot of things in a lot of different matchups. Assassin's Trophies, just as general hate cards, able to attack things like Stony Silence, Rest in Peace, Planeswalkers, pretty much anything this deck needs to kill. 1 copy of Fatal Push to help against the smaller creature decks. Thoughtseize can come in against the various decks, both the combo decks and control decks. Collective Brutality is pretty reasonable in a lot of matchups, especially in this matchup against Burn. And then Dead of Winter, pretty nice sweeper. Between things like Arcum's Astrolabe, the Snowlands, there's quite a few snow permanents in the deck. So, between the 7 Snow-Covered lands, the 4 Arcum's Astrolabes. Generally speaking, Dead of Winter for 2 or 3 is quite reasonable early in the game. So this allows you to stand the tide against things like Goblins, Merfolk, humans to a certain extent. Gives you a way to kind of buy you enough time to find your combo pieces to close out the game. Tireless Tracker and Tezzeret are primarily for the grinding matchups, and then Ashiok here can serve as double duty. It's both a slower form of Graveyard Hate and can come in against control decks and against big mana decks or anything that's searching their decks a lot, so Primeval Titan decks, etc. Probably even pretty reasonable in the mirror. So, anywho, that's the deck that we'll be playing against, and with that, let's get into the matches. Alright, we're back here for match number 1. Game number 1, just a quick warning. The nature of these matchups is more about testing, getting a feel for what hands are good in the matchup, etc. So the gameplay isn't completely tight due to how these videos are recorded. The person recording the Whirza deck isn't the most experienced with the deck. This is just to get a feel for the matchup, especially from the Burn player side. So just a friendly reminder, all the play won't be correct. There's a lot of things going on with this testing is going on. So that said, let's hop into game number 1, match number 1. Take a look at things from the Burn side here. Obviously, Olander, pretty easy mulligan. Sand's pretty solid. I think the pitchback's either a land or Grim Lavamancer. I think given the lack of true pressure on one, keeping the Grim's pretty reasonable, so I think the pitch is one of the lands. Obviously, Grim's a lot worse without a fetch land, but still it's kind of important to have the creature. Fairly fast start there. They're emptying their hands, seeing a little bit what's going on. We go ahead and attack with Grim here, since we're just going to play Eidolon. Getting Eidolon down is obviously important early, because, they cast a lot of spells that are fairly cheap. They play Foundry, which obviously is problematic. Go ahead and attack. Attack in with the 1/1 here, because they do have access to 1 mana they could use to sack to get the thing here. Do think they missed the opportunity to potentially maybe crack something to kill us. Guess they have Urza, so that makes sense. They played the Bauble, which I don't know if that's necessary or not. We Boros charm them here. Though they do have access to a lot of mana. No really good attacks here. Then we go ahead and bolt them in response to this Engineer, which would have allowed them to grab the thing. They still have to sacrifice something else, and they don't. So right now they have access to 1, 2, 3, 4. I suspect this was a mistake by our opponent here. We had access to 2 more damage, so they would have had to sack 3 artifacts. 1, 2, 3. So they could have stayed alive this turn. No, I guess the game was over, because if they sack, 1, 2, because that would put them to 1, and then they need to sack 2 more artifacts to stay alive. That would have left them with the Foundry only. You can't sack creatures to Thopter Foundry, so even if they were able to go get Sword, they would have been dead anyway, or would have had to have sacked the Foundry. Yeah, so I guess they were dead either way. I thought maybe this was a premature scoop by our opponent, but no, it turns out the math was just so that they were dead just to the Grim Lavamancer activation here, and we obviously had the cards in the graveyard. So that's pretty much it for game number 1. Obviously they were very close to assembling the combo. They had a very fast start, but didn't really have the pieces to back it up quickly enough, and were able to close out the game with just enough pressure to kill them before they were able to assemble the infinite combo, which obviously is very scary, and it shows how close they were to actually killing us there with Goblin Engineer and such. Anyways, on to game number 2 and the sideboard. Alright, we're back for game number 2, going over the sideboarding. As I mentioned during the deck tech, we're cutting the Rift Bolts because a lot of the early versions I ran into the deck were the non-4 color based Teferi variants. So Rift Bolt's an actual active liability in those matchups. Obviously, Searing Blaze is only good really if you are able to hit Goblin Engineer, or if they happen to be playing a Stoneforge Mystic package. And then Grim Lavamancer tends to come out in a matchup in which you bring in Rest in Peace. We brought in the 2 Rest in Pieces to combat the graveyard portion of the combo. Being able to break up the combo can be important. We brought in copies of Smash the Smithereens because anything able to kill artifacts is a huge plus in the matchup, and then Skullcracks because the primary way they get us is through the combo and getting enough life to kind of outgrind us and then kill us eventually with an Urza or just a bunch of Thopters. So that said, let's hop into game number 2. Opponent, this hand, these 2 cards, like if this was a 4-card hand and it was these, I'd be happy, but just 3 lands is just way too many, especially without extra lands. This hand's pretty reasonable. I think the cut is either a Helix or a Skewer the Critics here, because we want to go Goblin Guide into Eidolon. Skullcrack's pretty important in the matchup. So I think, yep, we end up cutting Helix, because Skewer is probably pretty guaranteed to be a 2-mana play, or a 1-mana play, I mean. Obviously another fast start from them. We Goblin Guide them. They show us Thopter Foundry, so we know that's coming down this turn. Then they fetch her, which is interesting. They have Goblin Engineer, sure, go get the sword. Show us another Thopter Foundry, they chump block, keep their life total high. They play Galv Blast on the thing. There's a Thopter Foundry. And now they have access to, well, it's not quite infinite, it is basically every turn they're gaining a boatload of life. And it's going to be pretty much enough to outstrip what we're doing, especially when they just keep gaining life. Plus these Thopters are pressuring our life total pretty effectively, and then they just kind of keep doing the thing. We could try to hold up Skullcrack here, but obviously they can just react to us holding our mana. This is one of the problems with Skullcrack potentially in the matchup, is, if your opponent assembles just the simple Thopter Sword part of the combo, even without Urza, if you're not able to disrupt Thopter Foundry itself, they're gaining life for basically each mana they have a turn, and that can really be problematic. And especially when they're getting to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, they're getting 4 to 5 life a turn. One Skullcrack isn't going to stop them, unfortunately. But I mean, it's still a key piece in the matchup, still kind of important. But just showing that Skullcrack enough, even with a good start, isn't always enough when they've got pretty quick Thopter Foundry into Sword of the Meek, and then obviously the role Goblin Engineer played. They don't even have to activate it; they just want to get the sword into the graveyard, and their deck's pretty good at functioning from there. Anyways, let's get on to the deciding game in this match. Okay, we're back here for match number 3. We'll be on the play, which obviously is hugely important in a matchup like this. This hand's an interesting hand. The Smash and Skullcrack are tempting to keep. I don't think I end up keeping this one. Just too dangerous to not draw a second land, and we didn't have any immediate pressure on them with creatures. This hand's pretty good. Probably put back the basic mountain. Turn 4 goldfishing against them is usually good enough, but Obviously, this hand still needs a little bit of help. They have no plays on 1. We just fetch a tapped land. Okay, they have Thought Profounder, but not a whole lot else going on. And Boros charm them. They brutality us, pitching a Goblin Engineer, and then we just kill them on 4. Did they mulligan in this game? Yeah, they mulligan to 6, so their 6 must have been functional with like Collective Brutality and Goblin Engineer, but it just feels like their hand was a little bit slow and clunky, and you know, sometimes a deck that requires that many moving pieces like Whiza can be a difficult deck to assemble what you need. They do require a critical mass of artifacts to come together. They do require at least 2 moving pieces for the actual combo. So a lot of stuff with their deck. It's a very powerful deck, a lot of cantrips, they see a lot of cards, but sometimes just critical mass decks, much like Burn, don't always come together. Sometimes you don't get your particular ball rolling, and sometimes you die. So their deck, like everything else, has a fail rate. So one of the things Burn can prey on is when a deck has a failure rate. So anywho, on to match number 2. Back here for match number 2, game number 1. Unfortunately, we're on the draw. This hand's pretty tempting to keep. A lot of 2-drop spells, though, so keeping this kind of hand might be obviously very much a gamble, but Goblin Guide into another 1-mana spell, it's very tempting, especially on the draw. I think I do end up... I guess I was disciplined in mulligan that hand. Though it was very tempting. This hand obviously pretty good. 1-mana play into Eidolon's pretty decent in the matchup usually. Put back Lightning Helix because it's not particularly relevant. Their hand appears to be fairly land light. They name Grim Lavamancer, which is interesting. Guess they could try to name a fetch land, but it's where one of the few situations where having multiple different fetch lands would have been nice. They run out the Eidolon, which might be too late at this point. They play a Gur Wellspring, and we just kind of start pressuring their life total as best we can. They sacrifice that to gain a life. They Galv Blast the thing, play an Astrolabe, start pressuring us here. They sacrifice the Wellspring, continuing to gain some life here. They find Urza. We burn some spells here to do the thing. Try to kill Urza. And then they play Sword of the Meek. So it's possible I shouldn't have burned these lightning bolts here to try to kill the Urza. With Urza, they have access to a lot more mana, the ability to gain a couple of life, so these burn spells weren't necessarily going to be able to kill them, even despite the fact that they were at 10. And Urza, obviously, with the ability to draw cards and such, is very powerful. And then the fact that the card was used to creates construct token. And then they had Sword of the Meek here. Sword of the Meek plus Thopper Foundry as soon as they untap gains them 4 to 5 life a turn. So, unfortunately, sometimes they assemble the combo and you just die. So, anyways, on to game number 2. We are back for game 2, match number 2. We are on the play. 4-lander. Well, it does have these 3 cards, which is a pretty good start. Could run out of gas, so I think this is a mulligan. This hand seems pretty decent. Double Eidolon, Rest in Peace, plus 2 lands. Actually put back one of the Eidolons, because having that many cards in hand can be problematic. 2 mana cards in hand can be problematic, especially when they're going to dump a good bit of their hand here on turn 1. They immediately have Thought Profounder, which is annoying. We play out the Rest in Peace, try to break up the graveyard portion of the combo. Okay. They do the thing. Immediately we're into a Pirate Spellbomb. Spellbomb away the Eidolon. Okay, apparently they just had a lot of cards in hand they wanted to cast. And then they have Whirza, which is annoying. Try a Skullcrack. They gain some life here, make a bunch of Thopters. And then they get the Goblin Engineer, attack us for a bunch. They go to 6. They go to 8. And we just don't have enough fuel to kill them. This is just a good example of how their deck, even through Rest in Peace, can kill us without Sword of the Meek. Obviously, Goblin Engineer would have been able to get Sword of the Meek and complete the issue with, you know, this stopping sword combo, but we still can lose to just enough life gain plus a ton of pressure from the construct and a bunch of Thopters. That's the underrated side of this combo, is this can close out the game very quickly when they have that critical mass of artifacts I was talking about earlier in the video. They are still a critical mass deck, even though they can win with just the combo. A lot of times, you know, they're not going to find the Sword of the Meek, or they're not going to find Whirza, so they have to rely upon sacking the artifacts they already have in play. And sometimes, you know, gaining 4 or 5 life and making 4 or 5 Thopters can be enough to swing the game. They can race back the other way, especially if the burn player is being aggressive with their life total. There's an Eidolon in play, the burn player's life total has gotten a little bit low. So there's a lot of things. This matchup is kind of underrated. You know, on the surface it looks like it's combo versus kill, but in a lot of times there can be other factors that lead to, you know, all that kind of stuff. So anyways, on to match number 3. Back here for match number 3, game number 1. Be on the play, which obviously is a huge boon. This hand's pretty good. We have Goblin Guide and the Eidolon. 3 lands isn't necessarily ideal, but it does enable us to deploy our hand, and we do have a soul land, or not soul land, a horizon land to help deploy things. So get that rolling here. Expose a breeding pool. They play Mox, they play that. Can't quite activate the Mox, which is probably good for us this turn. They reveal Whirza. Scarily, they fetch the Whirza away. Opponent does the Arkham's Astrolabe, which is interesting. They play the Goblin Engineer, put Sword of the Meek in the graveyard. We pressure them a ton. We obviously drawing the Swift Spear here is pretty good. Killing the Engineer so they can't activate it, and then we have exactly lethal on turn 3. So, obviously one of Burn's better draws coming together here, having lethal on turn 3 between the Eidolon, triggering a couple times for them, etc. Their deck does take a couple turns to set up, so obviously getting the burn portion of God Draw, turn 3 obviously is Burn's usually fastest kill. Sometimes you just gotta assemble the turn 3 kill and your opponent can't do anything. So anyways, on to game number 2. Back for game number 2, still doing the same sideboarding, boarding out the Lavamancer, the Rift Bolts, and the Searing Blood, or Searing Blazes, boarding in the final 2 copies of Skullcrack, the 3 copies of Smash, and the 2 copies of Rest in Peace against their combo. This hand has too many lands, so we're going to mulligan. This hand has Rest in Peace and a good bit of burn pressure, so I think this hand's fine. I think the card you put back is probably Skewer here. Let's see if I agree with my past self. That I do. A couple of things will be going on in the future here. Part of what's been going on with me and not recording as much, there's been 2 full problems. There's been some life changes, which have been very positive, but have made me busier, unfortunately. And the second thing is, some of you may notice that I like strained look at the screen and such. I went to the eye doctor yesterday, and I will be getting a pair of glasses. as I've been struggling with some distance vision and some eye strain issues. So hopefully joining the land of the vision corrected will help to make it a little less straining when I'm trying to look at the second screen here. Those of you who aren't familiar with a streaming setup, a lot of times the better streaming setups have 2 or 3 screens. Like my main monitor is what I look at here when we're playing, and I have a side monitor here where the camera and the different browsers and stuff I have open for information, the OBS recording software and such are off to the side. So I'm kind of struggling, even as far as this is maybe 2, 3, 4 feet away, 2, 3 feet away from me, and yet sometimes I struggle to watch the closer details. So getting glasses will help with that. But just letting people know why maybe the videos have slowed down from what they were doing before. But anyways, this hand's pretty reasonable. We have a way to disrupt the combo, or at least the infinite part of the combo. Some decent pressure, some anti-life gain measures. So opponent mulligan to 5, so a little bit unfortunate for them, but you know, any break we can get against them, they brutality us, take a skull crack, just play a Mox Opal out, we play Rest in Peace, they play Pirate Spellbomb, and cycle it, I guess. We go ahead and Lava Spike them, pass the turn with a couple Skull Cracks in our hand, and Skull Crack them. We do need to kill them. Holding 1 Skull Crack in the hand is important. Obviously, they're basically only they were only 1 card away here from potentially assembling a couple life, but once again, Rest in Peace kind of shutting off the sword half of the combo, and then we're just able to close them out fairly quickly. Once again, a little bit atypical. They did mulligan to 5, but that is one thing. You know, burn is extremely powerful, taking advantage of is your opponent mulliganing. So, you know, it's one thing about burn is burn and a lot of aggro decks just punish stumbles, and some of these kind of more intricate combo prison decks require a lot of things to go right. You know, they do see a lot of cards, they do have a lot of very cheap interaction, they have a lot of cheap cards, but they are a engine deck at the end of the day. And if you don't draw your engine, or if you struggle to assemble that critical mass of artifacts you need to be able to sack without having the Thopter Sword available to you, or you know, have enough mana to cast Urza. They may have had a couple of Urzas stuck in the hand, we don't know. You know, they only had access to 3 mana, so an Urza coming down would have fixed their mana problems, would have fixed their pressure problem. So it's important to note that, you know, sometimes winning these games comes down to your opponent getting a little bit unlucky. That's unfortunately Magic, and it's one thing with Burn is quite capable of, with its decent to good hands, punishing decks for stumbling. So that's why I said some of these games and matches are atypical of the matchup, but you know, that's variance in Magic, and sometimes you gotta take advantage of that in a tournament. So anyways, on to our 4th and final match. Alright, we're back here for match number 4, game number 1. We're on the play, which obviously is highly important in a matchup like this. Unfortunately, this hand's a mulligan. 4 lands, a little bit risky. So, mulligan. This hand's pretty good. We have an Eidolon, which is obviously one of our key cards in the matchup, especially on the play. Probably can pitch one of these lands. I suspect it's the basic mountain, because just use the fetch land to grab the mountain. Yeah, that's exactly what happens. So generally, you want to keep the basics in your deck. While it's not particularly relevant in this matchup, the ability to trigger Searing Blaze in a matchup with your fetch land can be very important. Eidolon here comes down before our opponent can really deploy much. They have a Gal Blast. We go ahead and spike them. They deploy Sword of the Meek. You know, we don't have a whole lot going here. They have the Foundry, and they just start gaining a bunch of stuff. So looks like they didn't do a whole lot the first couple turns, but at the same time, we could basically have to concede here because nothing we can do to break up this combo, and each mana source they get, they're getting life a turn, and we've drawn too many lands. So while our hand was pretty good and did have a pretty fast, strong start, you know, sometimes just sword into Thopter Foundry, game over, GG unfortunately. Anyways, on to game number 2. Back here for game number 2 on the play, which is important. This hand's pretty good. We have Rest in Peace, Smash, and Goblin Guide here, all of which are important in the matchup. Goblin Guide, obviously, you want the early pressure. Actually, no, this hand was a lot closer than I gave it credit for, huh? Because of the one-lander. I think I ended up keeping just because the upside of this hand was so good, and I did have some one-mana plays here. They show us Thopter Sword, which is just kind of terrifying. Got a little bit lucky here to draw that second land. Deploy the Rest in Peace here. Opponent plays the Foundry. They make a slight misstep here. I think they kept the wrong Mox Opal. This would have at least given them access to one life gain here this turn, which could have been important, especially since we were able to go ahead and kill the Thopter Foundry, and then they show Sword of the Meek on top of the deck. Apparently they already had a sword in hand, and now they're just kind of floundering without the ability to have the Thopter Foundry. So obviously we're seeing here important here how a card like Smash to Smithereens, when they're kind of tight on mana, etc., is kind of important. That's why it's important to have some amount of disruption in your deck for some of these decks. Things like Rest in Peace for Dredge, things like Rest in Peace for this matchup, things like Smash. They can play a role in winning the matchups. They're not going to win the role on their own, they're not going to win the game on their own. Burn has very few cards that legit will win a game on their own, outside of something like Eidolon, and that's the thing. Things like cards like Eidolon, cards like Searing Blaze, they're so hit or miss sometimes. Eidolon is a little bit more flexible, obviously, in what it's doing, but there's a lot of cards in Burn that are very, outside of your bolts, your Goblin Guides, your Swift Spears. There's a lot of cards in Burn that are like a 7 most of the time. Cards like Rift Bolt, cards like Lightning Bolt, cards like Boros Charm. There's a lot of cards that are like a 6 or a 7 on the scale of power level of Magic. But then you have cards like Eidolon that can be a 10 or a 2. Like, there are some matchups where Eidolon and Searing Blaze are total garbage. Eidolon can be garbage against things like Eldrazi Tron. A lot of decks that just like don't care about that effect. And Searing Blaze can be, like in this matchup, other than Goblin Engineer, it's complete trash. It's basically a 3-mana Lightning Bolt if they play a creature. So, lots of powerful cards in Burn, but Burn is a deck that is very homogenous. Deck like Urza Thopter Sword, very reliant on a few key cards. Lots of cantrips, lots of setup. Basically setting up the Thopter Sword combo or Urza itself. So, very powerful deck, but does have key engine cards. They don't find those engine cards, they die, or if you can disrupt those engine cards, they can be in a lot of trouble. So, understanding key cards in the matchup, Thopter Foundry, Urza, those are pretty much the key cards. There are other things that can be important, but those are the main ones, especially against the build we're playing against in this video. So, things to understand is the cards you need to disrupt, getting Thopter Foundry off the table as quickly as possible, not dying to Urza before you can close out the game. Those are kind of the important things from the Burn side. Anyways, one more game to decide if we win this fourth and final match. We're back for the fourth match, and the final game in that fourth match be on the draw, unfortunately. This hand, it's a pretty good Burn hand, but we don't have any disruption. This hand's obviously relying on the clock to try to close out the game before our opponent can kill us. We don't have any Skull Cracks, don't have any Rest in Pieces, don't have any Eidolons, etc. So, still a pretty solid hand overall. Can't really dissuade us from keeping this hand. Our opponent used the Bobble and Fetch Land trick to try to improve their draw step. So it seems like they have a little bit of a slower draw over there. They fetch. Interesting. Pitch. Sword plus a land. We go ahead and Swift Spear them. Suspend the Rift Bolt. They play Psy. Go ahead and take the opportunity here to kill Psy. Them getting a bunch of chump blockers could be very problematic, especially since it seems their hand's a little bit on the slow side. It's possible we can close them out if we have good draws from here. I choose not to play a spell there to be able to hold up Skullcrack in the face of if they were somehow able to deploy artifacts. Forgetting that Inventor's Fair does require 3 copies of artifacts to trigger, so kind of a misplay there on my part. Opponent deploys a Welding Jar. Still not a whole lot going on over there. The Assassin's Trophy our thing, and we go ahead and we have enough mana here to kill them. They're still not gaining life, so holding up Skullcrack seems reasonable. We go ahead and smash something. One thing I wasn't sure is the interaction on smash, whether you had to destroy the artifact or not. Turns out you don't, which is important. And then obviously Goblin God here wasn't really necessary, but we go ahead and wait for them for their end step as they try to cast a Whir of Invention. One card that could potentially be on the radar from some of these Whir decks is something like Witchbane Orb. Could be problematic, so it's good to hold your thing and force them to act first, especially when you have the trump card to kill them, and then the response here. Don't know if they have something like Spellskite or not. We knew from the deck list we were looking at they don't, but you don't want to wait around for them to hit something. They could have like a 2-mana life gain artifact or something like Bottle Gnomes. So you just want to kill them in response there. You don't want to play a game of cat and mouse too much. Once that spell goes in the stack, just kill them. So, anyways, on to the wrap-up. Quick wrap-up on the video here. Once again, I will mention that this version of the deck was not played by the most experienced Whirza pilot. Also the fact that this deck was not the most geared towards specifically beating burn. So keeping those factors in mind, the matchup still feels close. I think the matchup comes down to, like a lot of this things, consistency versus power. There are key cards in their matchup. Thoughtbrew Foundry, Whirza are kind of their key cards. In addition to any type of life gain, they have a lot of ways to find their combo pieces with Goblin Engineer, Whir of Invention. Whirza, obviously, they can't find with any of those methods, but they do have a lot of cantrips for Arkham's Astrolabe, the Ichor Wellspring, various spell bombs. They do have a low mana count. They have Inventor's Fair to help find this stuff in longer games. They have a lot of redundant ways to find their combo, basically, so not giving them time is really key. You need pressure plus disruption in a lot of these post-board games to kill them. Pressure can come in any form with a burn deck, but things like Eidolon, Rest in Peace, Smash to Smithereens can all be relevant disruption in what they're trying to do. So the key thing is to do the burn thing, get ahead with creatures, kill them quickly, and hope. They do have a non-zero amount of the ways to get around that with just naturally drawing Thoughtbrew Sword. In turn 2, turn 3. Or even turn 3 comboing us with Whirza. So, their deck is very powerful, very strong. I still think it's a well-placed deck in the meta, something to be aware of moving forward. I just wanted to play these games out as an opportunity for people to better understand the matchup. These games are not completely representative of what the matchup's like. There was a lot of mulligans on our opponent's side, especially. We had a lot of very fortunate draws. A lot of times we were on the play, etc. So, matchup's very interesting. I think the matchup's close. I do think the Whirza side, especially if they want to pay attention to burn, is probably slightly favored. But Whirza is a much higher skill-intensive deck. I think the skill floor for Whirza is a lot higher than the skill floor for burn. I'm not saying there isn't skill on the burn side, but obviously the barrier to entry with burn is a lot lower than the barrier entry for something like Whirza. So usually the pilots that are going to be playing Whirza in tournaments are quite proficient with the deck. So take this for a grain of salt, but it does play out, does show the important cards on the burn side of the matchup, etc. And as always, I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know if you like this format of the video. This is probably the 4th or 5th version of the Versus series that we've done. They've gotten a little bit slower. The thing with the Versus series videos is they take a lot longer to make than some of the other stuff because I play the matches first, and then I record things. So, I am actually playing the matches and then going back and explaining, the walkthrough of things. I think that's a little bit more effective than trying to do the jumbled. Uh, trying to commentate while also uh, playing the matches. So I think this I do the replays mainly on this because it's a little bit easier than trying to record them while doing the testing. I have great respect for people like Star City Games who do the versus testing live. I personally do this formatting because of how things have to be accomplished. That said, I hope it's very informative to you guys, as I still aim to be the most informative lightning bolt based channel. That said, there are other burn channels out there, especially if you like burn content. Don't forget to check out Day 2 Dryden. He's doing a very Nikachu-esque thing with, a new video every day with a match. So if you like daily burn content, don't forget to check out Day 2 Dryden, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel to get a little bit different content. I aim to do a little bit different stuff than what he's doing. He does a lot more match play. He plays a little bit different variant decks. I try to focus a little bit more on, I still do match play and stuff, but I try to do a little bit more informative, deep dive stuff on like specific matchups and stuff. Also on changing variants of decks. So, and we do a little bit of Arclight Phoenix decks on this format. I'll be getting back into that with the printing of what was the card? Merchant of the Veil, and then Haggle, I believe, is the spell portion of the deck that might help Izzet Phoenix come back a little bit. But that said, I still don't think Izzet Phoenix is well positioned in the current format. I think even if Faithless Looting had not been banned, that Izzet Phoenix would be in a rough place right now. But we'll be doing some occasional Izzet Phoenix things, but we'll be for now focusing primarily on burn. And with that said, hopefully we'll be getting some more video content coming out as things have started to stabilize a little bit with the schedules and such. And once I get my eyeglasses, I'm a little bit less issues with fighting my eyesight here. So anyways, this has been John for MTG Nexus. Hope you all have a great day.